a strain of the flu versus tanking our economy and fortunes being lost, and people can't afford this or that, because wealth and life expectancy are directly correlated.
This is true. This is true. I think from a governmental perspective, without getting too deep into it, I think your first priority and your first responsibility to people is not to let them die. And I think if there's a first instance problem, generally, I think you've got to agree on the side of caution and deal with that first threat before you look at how the secondary threats are going to take place. But this is a huge conversation, and certainly some touchy stuff. There's a lot of opinions around it, and I certainly wouldn't want to offend any listeners.
Of course not.
And then on the conversation.
Of course not. And then back to the roots of heavy metal. Not to change the subject, but I'm going to do it anyway. Back to the roots of heavy metal. When it all started in the 70s, the detuning of the guitars, and then how everything was so scary when Deep Purple released Highway Star, and everyone was terrified of it at the time. Black Sabbath followed suit, but did cover songs on their first album of old blues classics. Now, heavy metal, where has it evolved today?
It's certainly evolved quite substantially. I think there's a lot of yearning for the old days. I think those in the 70s, those in the 80s, those in the 90s all harken back to their own times. I think the noughties as well, the 2000s, even the last decade, 2010 to 2020, everyone harkens back for their own time. But the reality is there's some fantastic stuff going on right now. There's a lot of evolution in the genre, and doing Darkest Corners of the World and hearing submissions, as well as writing for the Metal Wanderlust website that I write reviews for. I get to hear some really amazing stuff. Something that's come across our desk is a band from Melbourne, Australia called ESP Mayhem. They have a song that they've submitted to us called Do Worse. Their concept is around having live drums still, having the intense vocals, but they attempt to eschew all guitars and do everything else with live synths. So less everything programmed, more how can we play this live and see what happens. It's one of those concepts that could be very hit and miss. I think the intensity is absolutely off the charts with this band. They've got some great stuff to check out. Won't be for everyone, but let's give this one a run. Here is Do Worse by ESP Mayhem. back here in the multiverse with Andy, Adam, and Brad. It's a Darkest Corners of the World, Andy's Philosophy Corner crossover. You just heard ESP Mayhem out of Melbourne, Australia, with their tune Do Worse, and certainly showing the evolution of heavy music there. Andy, I believe you have some thoughts on that evolution.
Absolutely. It sort of fits in perfectly with what we were discussing about Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, and with the very, very heavy sound of that track. And in the heavy use of electronic, it took me right back to the first time I heard White Zombie, Rob Zombie, and I think I was about 29 or 30 at the time, and I was really taken aback, but I'm like, you know what, this is really slick, because they were playing heavy metal in dance clubs, and I'm pretty sure nobody did that before White Zombie. So yeah, in terms of this track, I mean it's certainly creative. It's not like exactly like anything I've heard before, and it's pushing the envelope. It's guys with an original idea about a sound they want to put together, and it's not lacking for energy.
Andy,
Absolutely.
Andy, Thunder Kiss 65 is the name of the song you're talking about, and I 100% agree. I heard that song, and I saw that song on Headbangers Ball on MTV here, and I thought to myself, what is this? What is this? And they had this almost electronic groove heavy metal song set to an almost 70s music video, and I thought that blew my mind at the time. I mean, that was pure artistry at that time.
During my time in China, I had a really interesting experience with the evolution of harder music into clubs, and it really took me aback. In a club in China, and they have playing like a dance version of a Britney Spears song. Okay, we're all par for the course so far. Then there was this weird moment where these kind of like latex clad kind of Russian women came walking out, and Rammstein came thundering after Britney Spears. So you had this bizarre thing where I'm in this Chinese club with a handful of expats, all Chinese people, blonde Russian women dancing to Rammstein, and then the next song was another Britney Spears song. It was bizarre, but it certainly shows the evolution, for good or bad, of electronics into heavy music. But certainly a lot of fun, and yeah, weird at the time, very weird.
Yeah, that's actually kind of awesome, and I feel like I searched for that online at a really late night at one point. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it was. I didn't know how to feel at the time. I just didn't know how to feel, and we're all kind of uncomfortable and looking at each other. But it's kind of. I think any time where musically your expectations are subverted, that's a good thing. It shows that we're moving forward. We can't be safe all the time, and in a worldwide pandemic like we are at the moment, our safety nets have been torn away, and I think it's doing good things for creativity. I think there's going to be a lot of bands come out with some amazing stuff. A lot of artists certainly who'll find real deep inspiration through personal experience where maybe there was an absence before. It's a heavy toll, a heavy price to pay, but this is life, people. We move on, we deal with things, we move on, we grow, we evolve. So I think everyone around the world is starting to take those positives, and we have to run with it. So continual evolution.
Continue the evolution of music. And if you want to talk about danger in music, the history of danger in music, the note of B flat was considered the devil's note.
Well, this reminds me of the fact that in music theory, back hundreds, thousands of years ago, as they were developing an octave and the intervals, like a fifth and a fourth and a third. And it turns out that a fifth, a fourth, and a third are all very, very basic ratios, like a 5-4 and 3-2 and so forth. I'm getting to your point. The interval of a diminished fifth, also called an augmented fourth, also called the tritone, was called the devil's interval, and there were rules.
Minor third on a minor third.
Right, like an E to a B flat, which you hear in the song Yankee Rose by David Lee Roth, which is kind of where I heard that interval, and I thought, what is that? And then I found out it's the tritone, which at a certain point was deemed to be evil. There were so many rules for making music back then. I mean, classical music means what it sounds like. There were classes of people. There were people who wrote the rules, and everyone else had to follow them, and there were classes. There was someone who wrote the music, someone who conducted the music, and everybody else that did what they were told. So even as beautiful as classical music is, it was still kind of predicated on class. But in what we see over the centuries is slowly tossing out the rules or just ripping them apart. And so I don't think B flat is bad. I think A is a lot worse than B flat.
We need a listener poll.
Yeah, right. Some shoegazer music, yes. That'll fix us up. It doesn't. Well, yeah, go ahead, Brad.
No, the tritone thing, I think it's funny as a guitarist for me, and particularly a guitarist of a heavier march, heavier persuasions. A lot of the time, I think of it in terms of fingering. That minor third with another minor third on top of it. What is it? 1 to 4 fret, 4 to 7. You get that tritone quite instinctively, and use it a hell of a lot in extreme music. You don't have to look very far, and you can understand. I think you can understand when you hear when you hear that tonality. You can understand why people, in a much more conservative times would have felt that way. Oddly enough, you hear it in the soundtrack to The Handmaid's Tale, which just makes no sense whatsoever given the subject matter. I would have thought they'd gone back to that conservatism and would have at least had the thought to maybe keep the music light and airy. The Handmaid's Tale is full of all kinds of stuff. It's a silly joke. It doesn't really apply.
And then, you think about, and then I always harken back to Black Sabbath. Okay, so Black Sabbath did it in so many different songs. They did that scary chord, that scary tone, and back then everybody equated it to, well, this must be devil worship, right? And then it went up and up and up and up through the decades, and then we had the Tipper Gore thing. We had the Tipper Gore thing with the Satanic Panic. If you recall the Satanic Panic.
I sure do. Zappa and John Denver and Dee Snider all testified before the Parental Music Resource Center.
That's the PMRC that Dave Mustaine spoke about in his Megadeth song, right?
I believe so.
He did?
And